what's going on, guys? It's Mike again from BavhausTV, and in the shop today we have an e90 328xi, and we're going to show you guys how to replace a differential output shaft seal. So now, underneath the car by the rear differential, and if you look, you can see from this shaft seal here, we have a pretty decent sized leak on the differential. So what we're going to have to do is remove the wheel, get this axle out, get this hub out, and then behind there we'll be able to get to the seal, replace it, and then reassemble. So first thing we're going to do is take the wheel off. After you get the wheel removed, you're going to need a 36mm socket, preferably on an impact, or if not, if you don't have impact tools, then just do this on the ground with a breaker bar and a large bar. You can knock these out. There's these little tabs that get bent in to prevent this from spinning backwards, but I have enough breakaway torque and we're going to be replacing this nut. Pretty much all the hardware that we're going to remove doing this job is going to be replaced in the job. Everything's one-time use. So we'll start with this one. See, it ripped it all right off. And then now we're gonna go inside and remove the 6 bolts that actually bolt this axle to the differential. So we're gonna remove these 6 bolts here. They have these washers or spacers that fit on every pair of 2. And I don't replace these washers or spacers, but you do replace these bolts. BMW recommends it. Also, their torques, removing them is always on an angle, and the heads kind of can get compromised pretty easily. Sometimes these are really hard to remove. These don't look like they'll be that bad. Definitely before you do a job like this, make sure you get these bolts. So what I like to do is actually put a 12mm e-torques on from up top. You can use some swivel or wobble sockets or wobble extensions or a swivel in general, but in example here, I'm just going to use a straight long bar and then the impact with a 3/8 inch adapter. So right there is just the E12 reverse torque socket, a very long extension. I'm going to do it all out here from the passenger side rear of the car. All right, so I'm going to go from out here. We keep an eye on the socket itself, and I got it out. So if you don't want to do it from out here, you don't have tools to do it like this, you can do it directly from the axle, from underneath, how we were just sitting underneath there. But what you want to do is either go inside, pull the parking brake, or put the car in gear if it's a manual. Every single time you turn it to stop the rear wheels from turning, because if you're putting that gradual force into loosening it, you're going to be turning the wheels. A screwdriver between the fins of the rotor works pretty well when I do it that way. But in this case, since we have the impact, that breakaway torque prevents the wheel from turning, gets us our bolt out, and then makes it so I don't got to keep going inside the car. I can just turn the wheel. So this is the best way to do it, but not the only way. All right, so the next thing we're gonna do is remove the lower control arm bolt here, and that's this one that's got a nut on the back, 21mm bolt and nut. This is gonna allow us to swing the hub out away from the right rear of the car and allow us to slide the axle down. Where you just have a transmission jack here, you guys can use a floor jack or whatever just to keep the pressure of the spring and shock. They're under load right now. When you remove this bolt, it's gonna wanna spring down at you. If you're underneath the car, it's pretty unsafe. So we're just gonna manage that and let it down slow with our transmission jack. Let's get that up into place. Once it's there, we don't have to push up on it, just support it. We're gonna grab a 21mm wrench and socket. And what I like to do is, I'll start with the socket on, I'll counter it until I get the nut off. And in this case, it's actually coming out. But if it doesn't, you can take the wrench that you were just using, put it behind the bolt, push on the head as you hit it with the impact and it'll come out. All right, so this is the bolt we just took out. And again, as we took it out, I took the wrench from back here, removing the nut, put it up here, and that's what I was doing. So I was hitting this, pulling it out, and pushing with this hand against the socket, and that guides it out without you having to struggle to get that bolt out. Because this is on a ball joint, or this bushing is, and it's gonna wanna go where it naturally sits, which is in line with the spindle or the knuckle in the rear, not with the lower control arm. So getting that in is a bit of a pain. Now we can lower the shock, and you can see it's binding. So you don't want to trust it immediately. So I'm going to quickly go and get my pry bar, and then just give it a couple moves on either side, just being careful not to get any movement into that rubber. And then once you do that, you should be good. The shock is still supporting the spring, but let's say something's wrong with the shock, it might lower a lot more than you want it to. So now I should be able to move the hub in and out a little bit. So you can see I can kind of get that out like that. You can see that lower control arm just moves. And now if we go back underneath the car, we can go remove our axle. So now we have the room, or we should have the room, to get that guy out like that. All right. And then what we're gonna do here, if you're by yourself, you wanna support the axle with something. So we're gonna push this up. If you have somebody with you, they can hold it, but we're gonna have to get the axle out of the hub now on the other side, which is just held in by clamping force of 2 spline drives, one in the wheel bearing and then one in the hub, sorry, and the other one on the axle itself. So let's go back out there and grab our air hammer. All right, so now that we have the bolt off here and the axle removed from the differential, we need to just press this out. So there's many ways you can do this. I'm just gonna use an air hammer that is only gonna punch on the center. You don't wanna punch on the outside, so don't use like a real hammer head on this. I just use a punch bit, and we're just gonna try to see if this works first. Okay. All right, now that we got it out, axle can come down. There we go. All right, so the next thing we need to do is pop out this output shaft. The output shaft is put in by spline gear, and you can pry on this and just get it out by popping it out, but the damage that's gonna be done with this dust shield, you'll have to replace it. So if you wanna just pry on it, you can do that. We actually have the OEM BMW tool. Don't ask me why, but somehow we ended up with it. And what we do is we basically get the right fitting here, get it lodged behind that output shaft, and then there's this part right here that goes against the case. We're going to pry and hopefully be able to get it out. Okay. So that was actually my first time ever using this tool. I like it. So if you guys are curious about it, it's loaded with part numbers. I guess every single piece has its own part number. We'll give them to you in the end, but that's the tool. These heads are interchangeable. Really cool. I like it. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do is measure the depth of the old seal just so we make sure we don't mess it up. So here it is about, I wanna say, it's like 6 millimeters. My digital part's broken, so I just wanna make sure. Yeah, 6 millimeters on the dot. So we wanna put the new one in 6 millimeters. The first thing I'm gonna do is grab a really long pry bar. I say really long because it gives you the amount of leverage you need to get all the way behind the seal. So you can see I can't really get to the case because of the size of the seal. So I'm just gonna press on the seal itself until I can reach the case. I'm gonna move around. Try not to completely destroy the seal because I want to use it to press the new one in if possible. So right here is where it's gonna pop out. And to show you guys what the inside of this looks like now, so you can see the snap ring and the bearing, and just so you can have an idea of what you're getting yourself into, what goes on inside the differential. We'll give you a shot of that quick. So in there you can see the snap ring right here. That's your bearing, and then that goes into the larger gears in the center. All right, so here's our old seal and here's our new seal. There's some differences in the design. Mostly that this is shorter, casted a little differently, but I think where the seal actually fails is not on the outside, it's on the inside. So this ring here is what goes bad. If you look, there is this metal spring here. So you wanna make sure, see on this one, the spring's actually there. Usually it breaks or disappears when you remove it, but that spring can lose tension over time, let some fluid out. And since this is a rotational part, or a part that this rubs against is rotational, you know, a little leak, 1 drop every rotation kind of creates a decent sized leak. So that's why this fails. We're just going to now replace it with a new one by putting some gear oil on the outside of the seal, pressing it in as far as we can get it, and then using the old seal on the outside race kind of area of the new seal and just tapping it all around to drive it in. All right, so I'm gonna take some synthetic gear oil, just a GL5. It's not the exact one I'm putting in. Actually, it might be, but not from this bottle. And we're gonna put that on the outside of the seal here. And this is just gonna help it get in. Again, try not to use other lubricants other than the lubricant of the system that you're using. So here, we have a line of rust at that 6 millimeter depth. And if you look, there's a hole here for oil to actually get through. So you don't want to push it in all the way because you're actually gonna block an oil passage. And then you're actually gonna create more issues inside the differential. So you wanna go past that line of rust, but not all the way in to get past this hole. You want to just be right in that spot where you can tell the old seal was sitting. So it is a very precise location, but it's not so precise that you can't do it by hand. I like to use a rubber mallet, start driving these in. Okay, so right there it's in pretty evenly. You can go a little bit more there. But now, since I don't have an outside area to fit on, I'm gonna put the old seal up. And start using that to drive this. The reason I use a rubber mallet is because you have to put more force into it, but it helps you feel a little bit better. If you're using a metal one, you might accidentally drive it in way too far, and then the only way to get it back out is by pulling it out, and then you're gonna need another seal. It gives you more time to really feel out what you're doing. There is a driver from the dealer to put this in properly, but that tool isn't as worth it as the puller was. So I'm looking like I'm pretty much at that 6mm depth over here. So let's try to get it on this side. I'm just feeling it. All right, I'm gonna clean this up quick. Let's see if I'm where I need to be. I'm at 5mm, so we're just gonna go a little bit deeper. I think I'm at 6 up top. Yeah, it can go in a little bit more. I'm at about 5.5 up top, so let me clean off the seal quick. Okay, so now we're gonna do some more precise hammering. All right, that's doing a lot better. We're still at about 5 on the bottom. We're still right at about 6 up top. There we go. And now we just need to match that same thing up top. And I think that's it. Perfect. Nice. All right. And you can also see that we didn't go over any of the part that didn't have rust. So any part that's rusty is obviously what was outside. And then, you see that light? You can go in, and you should be able to see, you're not gonna be able to, but I can see that it's not pushing it all the way against that spring, so we know that we're getting oil there as well. So as long as you're around, I would give yourself like 1mm to 1.5 millimeters, maybe up to 2mm tolerance. Anything more than that, I wouldn't really suggest. Now we're just gonna clean this up. I'm gonna grab my output shaft, and we're gonna change the spring retainer clip on it. All right, so this seal is pressed in pretty evenly, as even as we're gonna get it throughout all corners of it. So what I wanna show quickly is by going in here, I'm gonna be able to see that oiler hole. You guys don't have to do this, but this is kind of the confidence that I'm gonna need to give you guys to put this in at the exact same depth as your old one. So I don't know if you can see on the borescope, that rectangular bit right there in the top right of the screen is right up against some bronze material, and that bronze material is actually that seal that we just pressed in. So as you can see, it sits right on the edge of that hole that I think is important for both letting oil in and also venting too much fluid out. And if that's to be covered up, you're gonna run into some issues with the differential. It's engineered to work as part of the differential. So you cannot just drive this seal all the way in. It needs to sit perfectly behind that hole and still deep enough where it doesn't interfere with the output shaft that goes in here as well. All right, the next thing we're gonna do is change the spring clip here. And this is a part that can be reused, but technically on paper it's one-time use. And you just gotta get a pick behind it. That's normally how I do it. And then I'll grab and bend it out. Like that. Take the new one, and the new one should go on with just your thumbs. Like that. And you can see it does actually kind of like take up more space. So I think when you pop it out, you kind of mess with the spring tension. So it would be a smart thing to replace it while you're here. All right, so installing this, it doesn't have any central orientation. You can put it in wherever, but what you do need to do is make sure that it's at least getting into those splines on the inside in the right place before you start hitting on it with a hammer. So there is an installer for this as well, but what you want to do is just get past that initial spring clip that we just put on, like so, and then just hammer it back into place. So that's how we do that. Now that we can see that this is all covered, our new seal is covered. You could have done this before, it probably would have been smarter. We're gonna go and just clean the entire case up with some brake clean, Make sure it's nice and spotless. If you're watching this video before you do it, definitely do that before. It slipped our minds. I'm also going to extract all of the gear oil, and we're going to change this to a magnetic drain and fill plug. We'll do that off camera and just get back to you guys once we're ready to reassemble. All right, so we cleaned the diff, drained all the fluid out, and we put some new fluid in and a new seal. Along with that, you're going to see that while we were in here, we changed the shock, but nothing to do with the job that we were doing was changed. So anything within the frame, we're not leaving you out on anything there. So next thing we're going to do is actually put our output shaft back in. So let's do that now. We lubricated the end of this with some white lithium right on the spline. Gonna get this back in and attempt to kind of walk it in as far as we can. These in the rear can be a real pain because the angle needs to be precise and you can't hammer on any of this. This is sheet metal, and if you put a punch or something on it, you will ruin it. So, and same thing with the back. It's very thin, and it actually is what keeps the grease inside. So do not, whatever you do, put pry bars or a hammer or anything to these output shafts. You just gotta be patient and work them through. I'm gonna go see what it looks like on the outside. So what I'm trying to do right now is just get it over this, because then I can kind of use the hub as a slide hammer and knock this back in the rest of the way. It's still a little too far out. Okay. Definitely getting further in. So this part here, not this part, but this back part, and not the full back part, but like where you actually clamp into, is metal. So if you hold it there, you should be able to give some light taps and actually drive it in a bit. Let's try like here. Oh yeah, it's coming out. This is a good way to get it in without damaging anything if you get caught up and your lubricant isn't working as good as it should. Make sure it's in the right spot. Can't stress that enough. It's really just on the reverse side of this flange where the bolts go in, the opposite end. That's what you're putting against the hub. And you're not hammering too hard, and I'm using a rubber mallet. This is about the only cheat code I know for this. Let's see what that looks like up front. All right, so we're almost all the way through. We're about flush. So now if I push this back up and out, I'm gonna do this a few more times. Rotate it. Almost there. So this happens a lot with E90Xs specifically, from my experience, where you get these to about this point and you can not get them through no matter what. So where your mind would immediately go to, let me start banging on the back of it, hammering it, trying to get it straight, just don't do it. It's gonna end up miserable for you. So they make a special tool to pull this through, and I always forget to buy it. So let me show you what I do every time that I forget and I need to do something within the situation. So if you look, this is a Newcastle nut for these axles on the E90Xs, and there's a flat spot right at the end. And what that allows you to do is to flip this way. You're gonna take it and you're gonna thread it on this way. All right, so this one's being specifically a little more difficult than the rest of them. So we took the shock out. We might have done it before, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take, also this is a new axle, we don't wanna do any damage to it. Normally I would just use this old axle as a slide hammer, but we just scrapped all our old axles. So I wanna protect the pickup for the EBS sensor. So if I take a prying tool, in this case we're gonna use the same prying tool we use to pull our output shaft out of our differential. So if I put a prying tool up against that, you can see those teeth are gonna touch that. So we're gonna take a wrench and put it down behind it, and that's gonna keep this tool off those teeth. We're gonna center it out. Justin's gonna hold it straight, and then I'm gonna start pulling, and just like that, we pulled it through enough where we can turn this loose. Go put it back in the box because we're gonna need to use this up front. Take the nut off this side, and that gave us just enough to catch a thread with a new nut on this side. All right, so as you can see, this is now out. We used a new axle, it didn't damage anything, and we kind of just used our heads there. So Of course, there's a special tool to do that. We use a special tool for a different job, which doesn't mean that you have to use that tool. We were just using it as a pry bar with some leverage. So do the same thing. Find a way to create leverage. In our case, we had to protect the new output shaft. If you guys can go get one, access one through a local garage, or if you've got some laying around, it's not as important to protect it. But as you can see right now, I can get that nut on. So what we're gonna do first, now that we have the nut on, is I'm gonna get a couple threads tightened on it just to make sure it's good. I'm gonna get Justin to hold the other side of the output shaft straight so that we pull it in nice and even. We're gonna get it probably, I'm gonna do about halfway. See how it lines up first, because I don't want to pull it all the way through and then have trouble putting in the other side. So I'm gonna pull it in halfway, check. If I can continue going, then I'm gonna continue going, get it all the way tight, and then we can go back in. But it's also gonna be a pain to tighten this completely without it bolted up on the other end. So let's just get it through halfway. All right, Justin's gonna go under there now. Hold the output shaft straight and put some arm into it. It's gonna try to run away from you. So I'm gonna put my arm on it too so I can feel what you're doing. All right, so now we should be able to just pull the axle up above to get the best angle and then get it in. You can kind of pull the CV a little to the side to see where it lines up best. Take your washer, put it back. And again, I always recommend new hardware on these. Sometimes these bolts can be a little pricey. That's the only thing that might keep some people from doing it. But let me tell you, after you take these in and out a few times, you're gonna regret not replacing them. There's not really a good angle to remove them from, and they usually end up marred up even if you're paying the most attention. So I like to get them all in first. The job is very similar to doing a wheel bearing, except for working on the hub side, you just go and work on the diff side. And I feel like a lot of times the differential services are overlooked when they're, if anything, less stressful than doing a wheel bearing, which, you know, the second you have a bad wheel bearing, you're gonna go and replace it. Kind of one of those out of sight, out of mind things. If you're not really looking at it leaking, you don't really think it's leaking, it doesn't really matter. But a wheel bearing is gonna be howling at you to replace it, and you're gonna go right away and do it. So hopefully this video shows you guys it's not that big a deal. Because even when we recommend them, we don't have a lot of people actually go through with these. And then we do replace diffs. This kind of stuff prevents you from needing a differential. Now I'm gonna go back with my long extension. I'm gonna tighten this all up. And this time I'm gonna put a swivel on it as we tighten. I'm gonna start right here at 12 o'clock and we're just gonna run as quick as we can through 6 of these things. You know what, actually, I'm gonna go from right here. Okay, let's do one across from it. That's the second one. Third one's up here. Fourth one's across from that one. Fifth one's going across from that. Alright, and this one should be the last one. Okay, cool. So now we're gonna go and torque them on a spec. So we put all these bolts in. We got them down to the point that they're locked in place. Since these are the zinc ones, they go to 70 Newton meters, and I'm comfortable torquing them to spec in a circular pattern because I did level out the shaft in a crisscross pattern. So we're gonna show you what I mean when I said earlier that we can throw something in the fin of the brake rotor to actually counterhold this, because we're gonna need a counterhold to actually get these up to torque. So let's show you that. Check. All right, so what we're gonna do is take, right here we have a punch. We're gonna put it right in between the rotor and the fins. And you can see it jams down like that. Now when we torque to the right, this is gonna prevent this whole axle shaft from spinning. So let's go under there and get them torqued up. So one, you're gonna see me pull this out. It's gonna allow me to spin it. And just out of convenience, I'm gonna give it to Justin to put back in. Last one. All All right, thank you, bro. So again, he was pulling that punch in and out. That's why we were able to spin it that fast, but you're gonna have to manually go back and pull that out and put it back in if you're doing it by yourself. Now they're all marked. Everybody knows that this was done at some point, and that's torque to spec. So now we can move on to the castle nut on the output shaft side of the output shaft. All right, so with these, the jointing torque is a lot for even the 1/2 inch torque wrench. We have a digital torque wrench that does up to, I think, like 350, but I think this one goes to 420, and if not 420, then it's I'm out like 100 and then like 145 degrees or something after. So I know that this has enough breakaway torque to torque this over the amount of whatever I need to torque with the torque wrench, as long as I hear my guns working right, which I know it is. It has like 1,280 foot-pounds of breakaway torque. So we're gonna go like this. Let it run until it completely stops, it has no more movement left. And then we're just gonna knock these 2 tabs in the same way that they were when we took it out, and we're all set. All right, so I'm gonna use an air hammer. This is my first time doing this. Normally I just use a hammer and a chisel, but we're gonna see if this works a little better. Alright, so obviously we have to put the shock back in, and we have some other stuff to reassemble, but in terms of what we showed you guys on how to do that, we're all set. So I hope that was a helpful video. I know we use a lot of bigger tools than some of you may have, but again, it's about how you use what's available to you. So hopefully the little calls of where I was like, use a pry bar instead of that weird tool that we had, or like use a floor jack instead of our training stand. You can make that relative to whatever situation you're in and kind of get the same job done within your means. But as always, thanks for watching BavhausTV. Hope this helps. All right, so I just realized we have a little bit of a blooper, and we never put this bolt back in the lower control arm. So let's do that quick. The way I'm doing this right now is I'm also installing that upper control arm that I said I was going to install. I'm kind of compressing that at the same time. Gotta make sure it goes in at the right angle. Occasionally you gotta pull it back over here. Okay, so what I did is I took this bar, I pried it against the bottom of the spindle, the top of the control arm. That gave enough room to straighten out that bushing. So now we can lower this in, wait for it to line up, get our bolt. And just like that, go all the way through. So again, sorry for that little hiccup that we had there, but putting the nut on right now isn't gonna be an issue. So we can let it all go because the bolt's holding it in place, and that's it. Cool.